We'll call to order the Finance Committee meeting of the Ogdensburg Bridge and Port Authority for Monday, October 26th at 3:30 p.m. The clock indicates 3:35. And as we begin, I wonder whether I could add an item to the agenda, which would perhaps be number 3 under business, which would be to discuss the 2021 budget. I assume that that's really agreeable to everyone. Let's take a look at the September 2020 financials, and Patty, it's always helpful if you run over that first. I think that this is becoming familiar turf for many of us. In any case, for me, the initials on the financial information, sometimes I think I keep losing them from one 6-month look at the financial to another. And I think it's pretty straightforward that IP stands for Industrial Park, but I keep being confused over MT, which I now calculate as Marine Terminal.
Marine Terminal.
And I understand that WT is Wind Turbine, and that AP is Airport.
Yes.
So that does help me understand the financial statement.
And you will see that all over the budget, the APs, the IPs.
Yeah.
And we can review that if anyone has questions.
Sure.
When we start in with that, with the line items on the budget.
Yeah. And with that, Patty, would you run over what you think you'd like to point us toward on the financial for September?
I always like to start with the statement of financial position, otherwise known as the balance sheet. Our checking accounts have $138,000 in them right at September 31st. That will only be the comptroller account and the consolidated reserve account. The revolving account is the account in which we write checks, so that money has already been transferred out into the checking account. Our reserves and other restricted, most of that money are reserves we have to keep on some of these bonds. With Tompkins Financial, M&T, Wilmington Trust, all of those. So that is money that is on our books, but it's actually not even in our hands. We come down to accounts receivable, and accounts receivable is at 1.3 million. Of that 1.3 million at the end of September, 1.2 million is due in from the wind turbine project. So our accounts receivable for regular, our rentals, etc., is only about $100,000, which is reasonable. Since that time, the wind turbine project has paid an additional $700,000. So we're getting to the end of that project.
Since this was?
Since September 30th, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Our inventory, the only thing we have on inventory is fuel. That's adjusted annually. I'm under the impression there is a discrepancy in the fuel inventory that we will correct for next year's audit. It's been a discrepancy now since before you got here, Stephanie, I believe.
Yes.
Part of it stems from prior to having the reclamation tank, when we had to test all the fuel on a daily basis. That was being thrown out instead of filtered and reclaimed into the fuel tanks. So that's going to be probably a majority of what we have to deal with in the fuel inventory. Prepaid is mostly insurance. Well, that one bill is the last insurance that has to be moved out. Because these are actually not prepaid, we've moved them out of a prepaid account, and they're on the books as being just owed.
Patty, what's the grants receivable?
That is one of the FAA grants. I'm surprised that we have it as a receivable. We don't have any of the other grants as receivables. We just put them on when we receive the money. So I find that one a little bit strange that it was actually put into the system as a receivable. Our fixed assets are all our land, machinery, vehicles, fixtures, plus the accumulated depreciation. Biggest portion of what we have. Our other assets are deferred outflows of pension and the OPEB, which is the other post-employment benefits, insurance to retirees, et cetera, things like that. The deferred outflows of pension has to do with the actuarial tables, the demographics of the people who would be receiving, and whether the mortality rate changes, how much we should have in reserve. And this would be if we actually had a reserve where we would hold the money for the retirees. We pay it as it comes in. And then our construction in progress, when projects are completed, they become part of the fixed assets up above.
What construction is in progress right now?
We would have the bridge. Do we have any port still in there? We should have some port still in there that hasn't been moved. No, we have the Pappy lighting that was just completed, which will now be moved to fixed assets.
Mostly, a large percentage of that is bridge.
Probably then, if we don't, unless we have some,
Well, as of September 30th, that was not, I think those are the two payment outs.
yes, probably.
Excuse me, would part of the Malza project be in that yet?
It's not construction.
It may be listed there because it is an ongoing item. I could check that. It could be some of the engineering for the MALSIP or the terminal expansion.
Okay.
Then we go into accounts payable, which were at 1.65 at the end of September. Of that 1.65, 700,000 was made up of Auburn Crane and OMLC. So the same situation is above, which
Just so everyone knows, that's the wind turbine.
the wind turbine. And then if you take out the New York State retirement, that brings us down to approximately 890,000 of regular accounts payable. We have since brought down the New York State retirement from 142 to 71. We will have that paid off in November, and we will receive in November, we will receive the interest bill that for carrying it as long as we have. What our hope is to continue putting aside the 35,000 that we're paying now per month. And that would give us 105 in February when the new retirement bill comes, which would give us a hefty one-time payment, and then we would continue with the 35s until it were paid off, which at that point could be possibly June of next year, saving us a lot of interest that we haven't been able to save this year.
I'd like to just take a moment to compliment Patty on that. And as you know, that was a pretty daunting thing. I didn't really know where we were going with that, but we also had to deal with New York State, and Patty kind of worked all of that out to an agreement that we're on a good track with that anyway. But I just want to make you remember how difficult that was. So at least I think we turned that around slightly. Thank you for that.
Current portion of long-term debt is simply what we're paying this year on all of the debt we have. Then our accrued expenses, there is accrued salary, vacation, things of that nature. We have the other side of the OPEB from other assets. The OPEB liability is $2 million, and that doesn't really change much. And then what is due to New York State is that 19 million, which doesn't change at all. We have other general liabilities. We have the retirement liability, which at the end of September was 142,000, which is now 71. And what is assumed to be the security liability, the security deposit liability of approximately 165,000. I think we're going to have to change that in the audit next year to bring it closer to 190, with all of the interest that would have been accrued had the money remained in. Then the long-term portion of long-term debt, and then our net worth. Any questions on the statement of financial position? Now we're going on to the income and expense reports. The bridge fund, which is really just the bridge now, though it does include the rent from the border station. Our bridge tolls were 80,000, year-to-date of 403. And the budget, as we have said before, was very conservative. We only estimated 283. So we are over the adjusted budget amount. Rental income, which includes the 90,000 a month from the border station, was 102 for September, 585 for the year, against a budget of 594. Most of that difference is duty-free that is not open. And if they don't open or meet their quota, which has been increased to $100,000 for the year, they only pay that next May. So until the border station opens, we will, or the duty-free opens, well, the border, we will probably see that number increase a little bit because the duty-free will not be paying us anything on gross sales. Other income, we've had no advertising income. So we don't have a lot there to go on. Our salary and wages are up a little bit. I have a strange feeling that I may not have taken John out. I moved some of John Risha's salary to the industrial park as he works with their leases, etc. And I have a strange feeling I never took what I moved to the industrial park out of here, but I will check on that. Our payroll taxes and employee benefits, we know, are off by a considerable amount from what was budgeted. So we are going to see that continue to rise.
Was that a budgeting error last time around?
Yes. Part of it was health insurance was budgeted low by $80,000 to $100,000. I don't know that any increase had been considered. Our insurance, I do know here that I have to change the year-to-date budget figure to the entire year budget figure. As we're no longer prepaying our insurance is sitting on our books until we pay each month. But we didn't adjust the year-to-date figure to show what the full year's insurance would be, which is what we should be showing this number, our year-to-date number against. So I will adjust that for next month. Interest, we've seen, in the bridge, I have to find why we don't have the amount of interest that the budget says we're supposed to have. Maintenance expenses, we've been keeping them down to a necessity. We haven't been doing anything that we don't need to do. Bridge maintenance, the same thing. Some of it, I believe, if I understand correctly, has been incorporated with some of the tiger work that's being done that that might, in reinforcing the structure, it will help with the actual maintenance. Our utilities are just about where they should be. General expenses, a good deal of that, again, is still our legal expenses, which you can see on that sheet that I passed out. Depreciation is what it is, and we end September with a negative 139, and year-to-date, a negative 569. And below that, just for informational purposes, what it would be if we hadn't received the PPP. Because we chose the 26 weeks on the PPP, our PPP grant was up on the 18th of October, and I will be submitting that in the near future. We have, going out the 24 weeks, we've used more than enough on the payroll and insurance. The one snag when you submit this to the Small Business Association is every bill that you're putting in there must be paid. So where we have utilities are allowed to be put into this, you have to have paid all the utility bills before you can put them into the calculation. So I'm hurrying and scurrying to make sure whatever we use has indeed been paid. Any questions on the bridge? Now the port fund, I just give you the breakout for September to help with understanding the year-to-date. There isn't much there. The insurance expense you will see, however, the deferments are over and the accrual was put in. You had mentioned that last month. So the insurance expense is now in, and everything else is as the expenses and income came in for the month. Then if we go to the year-to-date budget to actual.
Excuse me, before we do that,
Yes, sir.
back on the port fund.
Yes.
Is the reason why the change in net assets on the marine terminal is a negative number because of the lag between expenses and when income is received?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Because the under revenue was coming, I believe,
Mhm.
pretty much with the same.
Yeah.
So that will all even out by the end of November.
Okay.
Our year-to-date, our revenue income, Veritas buying out their lease has given us a bit of a bump in rental income. Otherwise, our rental income is just about where it should be. Fuel sales and fare charges, of course, are down due to the airport situation. And as we discussed before, we had salt budgeted to start earlier than it did, but we also had the wood pellets and the beer grain, beer tanks that were actually budgeted, and they were a one-year project. So the budget is somewhat overstated. The wind turbine, anything there will be timing, and all of the wind turbine will be done. The income will be received at the end of September or November, except for one payment of $50,000, which we will receive on the 8th of December. Airport, other income, a great deal of that is airport parking income. And we know that that would be down quite a bit with the situation at the airport. CARES Act, we received $195,000 in September, bringing our total year-to-date to $938,000. We have 2.4 million, so we are just about halfway through the amount we have for the CARES Act. And of course, when we started the CARES Act, we were able to go back to February. So our usage should even off to around 115,000 a month now, where we had a couple of good months where we were able to receive some monies for back invoices that we'd already paid. Salaries and wages, Steve and I have discussed this. When the budget was originally done, they put the longshoremen into wages. Steve and I both feel they probably should have been put in the wind turbine instead of the salary line. That is why that line is so much over budget. September had two big ship increases to our salary, and therefore the taxes and employee benefits, I still think there's a problem with the way we split them out. The original budget was done that the employee benefits would all go to the bridge. I've tried to break it out so that each area gets their portion, so I may not have that completely figured out yet. Insurances, because the airport is the only one who gets insurance by themselves, and everything else is put in with the property or the liability. The industrial park, the port, and the bridge are all lumped into one. That's why our insurance is so low right now. What we're going to try and do, what I'd like to do with the budget this year, is to break out the different areas so that everyone gets a better idea of who is actually using the insurance or how it's being spread across the organization. Maintenance expense, we've tried to keep that way down. The wind turbine project will even out by the end of November. Utilities is over budget because the solar payments were not included, and general expenses are a little under budget for once. Our depreciation, and then our change in net assets for September is a negative 96, and year-to-date is a negative 465. Any questions?
Does that wrap up?
That wraps up our financial statements.
Thank you.
And you do have, if anyone has any questions on the legal, we might discuss them when we discuss the budget going forward.
Are there any more questions on September 2020 financials or more discussion? Why don't we address the surplus lands in the town of Potsdam and get that done, then we can move on to our discussion of the budget. Mr. Lawrence, is there anything that this committee needs to do regarding the surplus lands in the town of Potsdam?
Other than what's before you, but I think maybe John wants to give a little summary of, a little background to this.
Yep.
Yeah, the last we had left it, Frank had researched the public authorities law, and we needed to do an appraisal. So we've now done that. He referred an appraiser, which was considerably less than most appraisals.
Yeah.
So that was good. And it came in at $49,000. So there's a resolution there to auction it. And the only concern I had was the date, November 17th, when I reviewed it. I wrote it, so I made a mistake. I think I meant December 17th, because if you decide to do that, you wouldn't meet till the 5th. It wouldn't become official till the 5th. So there would only be a short period of time to actually do the advertising and that. It doesn't have to be the 17th of December, it could be just a little bit, you know, you pick a date just to give proper time so there's proper notice in the paper and that, maybe just another week or something like that, whatever you feel comfortable with.
And am I right in thinking, John, that this is essentially a procedure that's required for disposing of land?
Yeah.
And that if we don't get a bid at our minimum purchase price, then we decide
Yes.
to make an adjustment.
There was just a, I believe, I can't recall, the letter, that we received a letter about potentially purchasing it, correct? Wasn't that
That's
how
what
it
started the whole thing,
that
was
they
the
can
Amish
wait?
family that lives next door. Yeah. And if you want, somehow they would have to be notified, because they wouldn't see it the normal way, so.
Correct.
You know, if I went out to put a auction sign on the site, I'll go next door and I'll hand them this, and they'll know what to do.
Is there any further discussion on this resolution?
I guess we need to move the date from the 17th. What's a week from the 17th? Is the, what,
24th?
24th?
I would think 3 weeks from the 5th would probably be appropriate, Sam, if that works for you.
Is that the 24th?
I gotta pull my calendar up.
I don't have my phone on
That was
there.
in Thanksgiving though.
Thanksgiving.
Isn't it, yeah.
Can't do that.
That's fine.
Maybe that Monday?
Maybe we'll get more for it if it were Black Friday.
Well, the 22nd or, well, 23rd would give it a full 2 weeks of that.
Chairman, I'll move the modified resolution.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Do we need to call the roll on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passed. So this motion will go forward to the full board.
Our next regular meeting.
Excellent.
Does that still give us time? I usually does, right?
Yeah, we-
Board meeting.
We would,
In 2 weeks.
board meeting's on the 5th, right? So
Yeah.
So that
we could have it all ready for
That
that.
should work.
And place it on the 6th for the following week. And I think a couple of notices during the 2-week period would work fine.
Great. Excellent. So our next item would be to discuss the 2021 budget. And we've received information on this form, which summarizes the current year's budget and the 6-month actuals. And just to make sure that I'm absolutely clear, the 6 months we're talking about would be January 1st through the end of June for this year.
No, our fiscal year is April through March, so
Yes,
this would
I'm
be
sorry.
April through September.
April to,
Yep. And then the right-hand columns are just mathematical extrapolations. None of those accounts have been adjusted,
No,
other than by the,
no, and there are a couple that we realize, one of the rental incomes, because Veritas paid in full, for instance, it wouldn't be a full double
sure.
for the year end.
so we, before we go any further, I think if we're going to discuss the proposed budget in detail, there's a lot of items in there. I think that we will have to actually discuss our relationship
Mhm.
with certain corporations. And I think that actually should be done in a executive session or a working group, working budget working budget group,
Mhm.
and if there are no other issues, we could adjourn the finance committee meeting.
I don't know of any other issues, and I would be quite comfortable doing that.
You're looking for a move, I would move to adjourn
That's right,
the meeting.
yes.
And I'll second that.
And that would be matters leading to the appointment or dismissal of a particular corporation.
Are we adjourning or going into executive session?
No, we're adjourning.
Without giving the reasons for the executive session.
Right, we're adjourning.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.